Welcome into your PFF State of the Franchise. It is your Atlanta Falcons edition. Sam, I've been very impressed with what the Falcons have done with their roster the last couple of years. Of course, just 2 years removed from being the NFC champs and going to the Super Bowl. And they're a team that a couple years ago felt like they just were weak in the wrong areas. Pass rush, and they needed to revamp their offensive line. They've done a great job. Now we're looking at a roster when we get into the offseason. I struggle in my mock drafts because, fans want to see you fill needs and all that stuff. There's not a whole bunch of glaring needs on this roster. Therefore, they haven't done a whole lot this offseason.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say you've been impressed by what they've done so far this offseason. I was confused because they've done hardly anything this offseason.
No, the last 4 offseasons, really.
Hardly any turnover to this roster at all, which speaks to what good shape they're in the first place. And even when you cast your mind forward to the draft, there aren't that many holes to fill. This really is a roster that's just looking to add depth across the board. The only real move I think they've made of significance this offseason, which actually, it's not a big high-profile move, but it may repair the single biggest weak link on this entire roster. They brought in Brandon Fusco, right guard from the San Francisco 49ers, who isn't a great player, okay? Even last year was his best season in a while, and he was average at best for the 49ers. But this is a team that has had disastrous right guard play for the last 2 seasons, and Fusco could be a significant upgrade for them. If he plays just average, that's huge. He allowed 29 total pressures in 2017. The Falcons right guards over the past 2 seasons have averaged 45.5 pressures. Ouch. So even if he replicates what he did last year, that is a significant upgrade on what is the only weak link on that offensive line. Also
a good fit for their zone blocking scheme. I think at least what he does is it keeps them from needing to really force a guard pick in the draft. I still think if the right guy falls in the draft, they'll pick him. There's a really good interior offensive line group. The other couple holes that they have now, Adrian Claiborne, edge defender coming off of his career year and a career game, the 6-sack game that he had against the Dallas Cowboys.
Thanks, Chaz Green.
Yes, thanks, Chaz Green, for that new contract. But Claiborne's out, and then Taylor Gabriel over at wide receiver. They still have Mohamed Sanu. Of course, they have Julio Jones. But I think looking for that complementary number 2 wide receiver to Julio Jones to allow Sanu to stay in the slot, I think that's going to be a key in the draft. And then, continue to just add to that edge defender group. You've got Takk McKinley, who they drafted in the first round last year, Vic Beasley, another former first rounder. So it really looks like a roster that's just adding depth and keeping them in that Super Bowl hunt.
And that's the key for this team, is they're now in a great position to head towards the draft, and they don't have to force any pick. They can really chase best player available, add depth across that roster. The only position I think that you might want to try and force a pick, but you don't need to do it in the first round, is to replace that nose tackle spot, to replace Dontari Poe, who left in free agency this offseason, find the nose tackle that can play next to Grady Jarrett, if for no other reason than to prevent you having to force Grady Jarrett to go back to play nose tackle, where he was the first couple of seasons. He's clearly a better 3-technique kind of pass rushing defensive tackle. If you can find a guy to do that, and where they are in the draft in the first round, Vita Vea, defensive tackle from Washington, may be the guy to fall there, even if he is nothing more than a run-stuffing nose tackle, which may or may not be the case, given what we've seen from him at Washington. He can step straight in, replicate what Dontari Poe did, and free up Grady Jarrett to be that wrecking machine.
Oh, that'd be a beautiful fit with him next to Jarrett up front. Here's the other name to watch, my most recent mock. I gave them wide receiver Michael Gallup out of Colorado State, and this is a wide receiver class that really doesn't have a lot of classic number 1s. You're not getting any Julio Jones clones in this draft, but a guy like Gallup really is that classic number 2. He's a good route runner. He can get open at every level, just subtleties to his game. He can make things happen after the catch. He might not be a first rounder on the NFL's board, but he's one of our top guys. I think he'd be a perfect complement to Julio Jones. And even if it's not him, there's a lot of other receivers in that mold that would be great fits.
And Gallup in particular gives them some nice flexibility with him and Mohamed Sanu. Both those guys can play outside. They can play in the slot as well. It lets you move Julio Jones around. That becomes a really dynamic receiving core in terms of being able to shift those guys into multiple formations, multiple positions. Makes them really hard to defend.
Yeah, so there's not a whole lot else to say about the Falcons. We love the way their roster is. Going into the draft, I do think it's all about depth pieces. And I think they're in a position to add depth at high-value positions. Get another edge defender. Even grab another cornerback, even though they've got Desmond Trufant and they have Robert Alford. They have Brian Poole playing the slot. You can truly never have too many corners back there. I love what they've done on the defensive side, adding that speed. Of course, Deion Jones at linebacker now Is he the best coverage safety in the entire NFL?
Coverage linebacker, but yeah, I'll go with that.
Coverage linebacker. He's right up there with Luke Kuechly now. So the turnover that Atlanta has had these last couple of years, I think they're in position to be, in the hunt pretty much every year.
Yeah, and in where they pick in this draft, I think it's a great spot to be targeting that extra corner. The bonus corner. You can never have too many of those guys. They, I think, are in a fantastic position, relatively low in the first round, to target any one of these guys. If you assume the first couple of corners will be gone off the board by the time they pick, they're down to guys like Jackson, the LSU defensive back, who can play inside, outside, can play zone, can play man. I think that would be a really interesting position to target at that spot in the draft. And you have your pick of multiple corners. It's not necessarily a top-heavy group, this cornerback class, but there are a ton of guys in that late first round, early second round range, and you just pick your favorite schematically.
Yeah, Dante Jackson out of LSU, Mike Hughes out of UCF, maybe Jair Alexander out of Louisville. A lot of different ways that the Falcons can go, but ultimately the story is they're in a very good spot to maintain their spot near the top of the NFC every single year. That is your Atlanta Falcons State of the Franchise, and it's been powered by PFF Elite.